Hey everyone, Poindexter here, and we continue our playthrough of the solitaire wargame Western Front Ace. In the last video, Lieutenant Daladier destroyed a barrage balloon over no man's land, but, other than that, his last two patrols were rather uneventful. His fatigue is increasing, however, but for the moment, he's still combat effective. So, let's continue Lieutenant Daladier's career. Before we begin, there's a minor update that needs to be made. It was pointed out to me in the comments of video 11 that since Lieutenant Daladier is an ace, we should have added a +1 modifier to the final total when determining how many contact patrols we are flying this month. We rolled a 5 for 5 patrols, but since Albert is an ace pilot, we'll add the +1 modifier to increase it to 6. Lieutenant Daladier's next mission will be an offensive patrol. We'll fly to enemy territory and engage any German aircraft we happen to come across. Albert takes off, and we roll for our first encounter. But no enemy aircraft are seen. Albert flies into friendly territory, and we check for an encounter once again. And no aircraft are spotted. Albert flies over the front lines, and he scans the sky for enemy aircraft, and spots a flight of German scouts. The scouts are Albatross D3s, and combat begins head-on. Albert will use reflexes to shoot first in this round. He fires and lands 3 hits, plus a possible hit to a crew member. 1 hit strikes the fuel tank, but the other 2 strike a non-existent rear gunner for no effect. Since we did land 1 hit, we checked to see if the enemy pilot was also hit. But he was not. The hit to the fuel tank only causes a leak. The Albatross fires back, but his guns jam. We now determine final position in the initiative check, and both pilots remain head-on. Another round of combat begins, and Albert fires at his wounded opponent and lands 4 hits. The German pilot attempts to clear his jammed guns, but fails, and the guns remain inoperative. We apply the 4 hits, and the hits damage the struts and tail with a critical hit to the engine. We determine the final position in the initiative check. With a damaged engine, we apply a -2 modifier to the Albatross, and the SPAD shifts 1 position with a 4-point difference and gains the advantage. Albert senses victory is close. He fires at the Albatross and lands 4 possible hits. The Albatross goes defensive and performs a Cuban 8, improving 1 position and avoiding 1 hit. But all 3 hits strike canvas for no effect. We now determine final position in the initiative check, and it's a difference of 3 in favor of the SPAD, and he is once again advantaged over the Albatross. Albert begins another round of combat and fires at the Albatross, and lands 5 possible hits. The Albatross performs a barrel roll, avoiding 2 hits. 2 hits strike canvas for no effect, with the 3rd hitting the Albatross's landing gear. We determine the final position in the initiative check, and Albert gains another position with a 4-point difference and is now tailing the Albatross. With the Albatross dead in his sights, Albert fires and scores 5 possible hits. But the Albatross pulls an Immelman, avoiding all damage and snapping back to the head-on position. We check for final initiative positions, and Albert just barely manages to gain the advantage over the Albatross. Albert is running low on ammo, so let's hope he has enough to finish off this slippery albatross. He fires and scores 3 possible hits. The albatross performs a tight turn and gains a position. We apply the 3 hits. 2 hits strike canvas for no effect, but the albatross takes a second hit to the fuel tank, and the hit causes a fire. With no hope, the burning albatross crashes in no man's land. And Albert is now a double ace with 10 kills. Albert decides to head home and enters friendly territory. We check for enemy encounters, but no aircraft are seen. Albert now has the airfield in sight, and we check for our last encounter. And the skies are clear of enemy aircraft. Albert begins his landing approach, and we check the weather. And the weather is good. Albert received no damage, so it's an automatic safe landing. We make note of Albert's patrol and his victory in the pilot log, and his fatigue level is now at 7. With this successful patrol, Albert gains an experience point, along with his wingman, who now has 3 points. With these points, our wingman will purchase the Expert skill, allowing him to redraw 1 combat card during a sortie. Albert's next patrol will be a bomber escort, where he will escort friendly 2-seaters to enemy territory. We are not allowed to engage enemy 2-seaters, only scouts, as they are the actual threat to this mission. Albert takes off, and we check for our first encounter. But no encounter takes place. Albert moves to friendly territory, and he searches for enemy aircraft, and spots a flight of German scouts. The flight consists of Albatross D3s, and combat will begin head-on. Once again, Albert will use his reflexes to get in the first shot. He fires and lands 5 hits. 4 hits find their mark, with the Albatross's struts taking damage and a critical strike that knocks out his forward weapons. With his forward weapons knocked out, the Albatross pilot will attempt to disengage whenever he is able. Until then, he will go completely defensive in combat, doing whatever he can to gain the advantage to do so. The Albatross goes defensive and performs a side loop, improving his position by 1. We now determine final positioning, and the Spad proves superior with a 5-point difference, which shifts his position 2 spaces, and he now has the advantage. Albert takes advantage of his position and fires, and his guns jam. But with our weapons maintenance skill, the gun jam is overridden, and Albert scores 5 potential hits. And the Albatross performs another side loop, improving his position by 1. We apply the 5 hits, and Albert's fire manages to destroy the Albatross's engine. The German pilot is forced to glide to an emergency landing in friendly territory, and Albert scores another victory. He now has 11 kills. Albert has performed his duty and heads back to the airfield. We roll for our final enemy encounter, and no enemies are spotted. Albert prepares to land, and we check the weather over the airfield. And the weather is poor, adding a +1 to the landing roll. Due to Albert's current fatigue, we cannot apply the -1 modifier for his landing skill. We roll a modified 7, which is enough for a safe landing. We document Albert's successful patrol in the pilot log, as his fatigue continues to rise. And with these 2 patrols completed, we've reached the end of the video. Lieutenant Daladier became a double ace during these 2 patrols and destroyed 2 German scouts. This is in no small part to his SPAD 13, which was, arguably, the best French scout of World War I. Albert's wingman also gained his first skill, becoming an expert in the SPAD 13. Both pilots continue to gain experience as the air war drags on. But the looming effects of excessive pilot fatigue grow with every patrol, and will soon begin showing its debilitating effects if not checked. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next patrol.